I was having dinner with my wife. While she went to the restroom, the waiter slid a small black box under my hand and whispered, "Hide this, you will need it tonight," before I could ask why he walked away trembling. I hid it in my pocket when I got home and finally opened it. But before we continue, if you haven't subscribed yet, do so to stay up to date with the most shocking and real stories happening around you. My name is Bernard, and at 53 years old, I thought I knew everything about my life. I thought I understood my marriage, my wife, my comfortable routine. That Friday evening at the Meridian restaurant changed everything. I believed about the woman I had shared a bed with. For 8 years, the restaurant was our usual place for special occasions. Melanie had insisted we celebrate something she called new beginnings. Though I couldn't quite grasp what she meant, the warm glow of the pendant lights cast shadows across her face as she smiled at me from across the mahogany table. Her auburn hair caught the light perfectly, and for a moment she looked exactly like the woman I had fallen in love with. All those years ago, we had ordered our usual dishes. Melanie always chose the salmon with herbs, and I stuck to my ribeye steak. Medium rare, the aroma of rosemary and garlic filled the air around us, mixing with the soft murmur of other diners, conversations. Everything felt normal routine. Even until Melanie excused herself to the restroom, I watched her walk away, her black dress flowing elegantly as she moved between the tables. She had been acting strange lately, more secretive with her phone, more distant during our conversations, but I attributed it to work stress. Melanie had always been particular about her privacy, and after 8 years of marriage, I had learned not to pry too much. I was checking my own phone when the waiter appeared beside our table. He was a young man, maybe in his 20s, with nervous eyes that kept darting toward the restroom. Where Melanie had disappeared, without saying a word, he slid a small black box under my hand on the table. "Hide this," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "You will need it tonight," before I could ask what he meant, before I could even process what had just happened. He walked away quickly, almost stumbling, in his haste to get away from our table. I looked around confused, wondering if other diners had noticed the strange exchange. No one seemed to be paying attention. I slipped the box into my jacket pocket just as Melanie returned from the restroom. She was touching up her lipstick, that same coral shade she had worn since our honeymoon. Her smile was bright, almost too bright, as she settled back into her chair. "Everything okay, honey?" she asked. Reaching across the table to touch my hand, her fingers were cold, despite the warmth of the restaurant. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Just checking some emails." The rest of dinner passed in a blur. Melanie talked animatedly about her day, about her friend Bethany's new apartment, about plans for the weekend, but I could barely concentrate on her words. The box in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric, demanding my attention every time I moved. I could feel its weight against my chest. We shared dessert, a chocolate mousse that Melanie claimed was divine, though I noticed she barely touched it. She kept checking her phone, claiming it was work messages, but her fingers moved across the screen with a familiarity that suggested personal conversations rather than professional ones. The drive home was quiet. Our house on Riverside Drive looked peaceful in the evening light. The garden Melanie had spent months perfecting, displaying its spring blooms. Lavender lined the walkway, filling the air with its calming scent. This was supposed to be our sanctuary, our safe haven. Why did it suddenly feel foreign to me? "I'm going to take a long bath," Melanie announced as soon as we walked through the front door. "It's been such a long week," I nodded. Watching her disappear upstairs, I heard the bathroom door close, followed by the sound of running water. Only then did I allow myself to retrieve the black box from my pocket. It was smaller than I had initially thought, about the size of a jewelry box. But heavier, there was no label, no indication of what it might contain. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a cell phone, not just any cell phone, but one I'd never seen be. It was an older model, the kind someone might use if they wanted to avoid leaving digital traces. Attached to it was a small piece of paper with a single word written in careful handwriting. Read, I turned on the phone, and immediately the screen filled with text messages. My blood went cold as I read the first few lines. The messages were between two contacts, M and Love. I didn't need to guess who M was. The timestamp showed. These conversations had been happening for months, some even during evenings when Melanie claimed to be working late, or spending time with Bethany. Can't wait to be free of him. One message read, just a little longer, and we can start our real life together. Another, the insurance policy is updated, $1. 5 million enough for us to disappear and start fresh, wherever we want. My hands trembled as I scrolled through more messages. They discussed details of my daily routine, my habits, my schedule. They knew I took the same route to work every morning, that I always stopped for coffee at the corner shop, that I went for evening runs along the lakefront path. Then I found the message that made my stomach drop. Baby's due in December, perfect timing. By then, it'll all be over. Baby Melanie was pregnant, and it wasn't mine. We had been trying for years with no success. The doctors had run tests, found no problems with either of us, suggested we keep trying, and now I discovered she was carrying another man's child. But the most chilling messages were the ones discussing my death. They weren't talking about divorce, about ending our marriage cleanly. They were planning to make me disappear permanently, to make it look like an accident. The insurance money would fund their new life together, and no one would ever suspect the grieving widow. I sat in my study, the phone clutched in my shaking hands, trying to process what I was reading. This woman I had loved, trusted, shared my life with for 8 years, was planning to kill me. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless and dizzy. From upstairs, I could hear Melanie humming softly in the bathroom. The same tune she always hummed when she was particularly happy, the sound that used to comfort me, now filled me with dread. Was she humming because she thought her plan was working, because she believed I was oblivious to what was coming? I forced myself to read more messages, each one revealing another layer of betrayal. They had been planning this for months, possibly years. Every loving gesture, every intimate moment, every time she had told me she loved me, it had all been part of an elaborate lie. The man she was communicating with, the one she called love, was someone named Milton. I scrolled through their conversation history and realized they had been together far longer than Melanie and I had been married. This relationship predated our wedding, our entire life together. I had never been her husband. In her heart, I had only been her target. The water stopped running upstairs. Soon Melanie would emerge from her bath, probably wearing that silk nightgown I had bought her for her birthday last year, and she would smile at me with those same lying lips that had whispered sweet words of love. While planning my murder, I quickly turned off the phone and hid it in my desk drawer, making sure it was completely concealed. Beneath some old files, my heart was racing, but I knew I had to appear normal. I couldn't let her know that I knew. Not yet. I had always prided myself on being a rational man, someone who approached problems methodically and found logical solutions. But this wasn't a business problem or a puzzle to be solved. This was my life, my marriage, my future, that had just been revealed as an elaborate fraud. Melanie's footsteps on the stairs told me she was coming down. I quickly opened a book pretending to read. Though the words on the page might as well have been written in a foreign language, my mind was reeling, trying to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said as she entered the study. She was indeed wearing the silk nightgown, and her hair was still damp from her bath. To anyone else, she would have looked like the picture of a loving wife, concerned about her husband's well-being. "Long day," I managed to say, not trusting my voice to remain steady if I said more. She moved behind my chair and began massaging my shoulders, her touch gentle and familiar. Once this gesture would have relaxed me, made me feel cherished and cared for. Now her hands felt like they belonged to a stranger, someone capable of unthinkable betrayal. "Why don't we go to bed early tonight?" she suggested, her voice soft and seductive. "We both need rest." I nodded, not daring to look at her directly. How could I share a bed with someone who was planning my death? How could I pretend everything was normal when my entire world had just collapsed around me? As we walked upstairs together, her arm linked through mine, I caught sight of our reflection in the hallway mirror. We looked like any other middle-aged couple, comfortable in their routine, secure in their love. The image mocked me with its normality. That night, I lay awake, listening to Melanie's breathing beside me. She slept peacefully, as if she didn't have a care in the world. Meanwhile, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions and a growing sense of dread. Who was this woman lying next to me? How had I been so blind for so long? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? The waiter's words echoed in my mind. "You will need it tonight." He had been right. I needed the truth, as devastating as it was. But now that I had it, I realized the real challenge was just beginning. How do you continue living normally when you've discovered your entire life is built on lies? I didn't sleep that night. How could I, knowing what I now knew about the woman, lying peacefully beside me? Every small sound she made, every shift in her breathing, reminded me that I was sharing a bed with someone who was planning my death. Saturday morning arrived with cruel normality. Melanie woke up refreshed, stretching lazily, before giving me that same warm smile she had perfected over our 8 years together. She kissed my cheek before heading to the shower, humming that familiar tune that now sounded like a death march to my ears. "I'm making your favorite breakfast," she called from the bathroom. "Blueberry pancakes and that maple sausage you love." Once upon a time, this gesture would have filled me with contentment, the thought of lazy Saturday mornings, good food, and the woman I loved taking care of me. Now every kindness felt poisonous, every loving gesture a calculated move in her deadly game. I waited until I heard the shower running before retrieving the phone from my desk drawer. My hands were steadier this morning, though my heart still raced as I scrolled through more of the messages I hadn't been able to finish reading the night before. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The messages went back almost 3 years, but the conversation history revealed something even more devastating. Melanie and Milton hadn't just been planning my death. Recently, they had been together for 10 years. 10 years that meant their relationship had started. 2 full years before Melanie and I had even met. I read through their early messages with growing horror. They detailed how they had researched me, studied my habits, my financial situation, my vulnerability as a recent widower, still grieving my first wife, Sarah. Sarah had died in a car accident 5 years before I met Melanie, and I had been lonely, isolated, the perfect target for their scheme. Here's exactly what we've been looking for. One of Melanie's early messages read, "Successful, lonely, and still devastated about losing his wife. He'll be easy to manipulate." Milton's response was equally chilling. "Make sure you learn everything about the dead wife, mirror her personality, her interests. Make him fall in love with Sarah's ghost." I felt sick as I realized how thoroughly I had been played. Melanie's love of classical music, her interest in gardening, her gentle way of making tea in the mornings, all of it had been carefully constructed to remind me of Sarah. She had studied my dead wife's habits and preferences, then molded herself into a perfect replacement. The messages revealed more disturbing details. Milton worked as an insurance investigator, which gave him inside knowledge of how to make deaths look accidental. They had studied other cases, learned from other perfect crimes, and planned every detail of my eventual demise. The running route by the lake is perfect. One message read early morning. Not many witnesses a slip on the wet rocks, a fall into the water. Bernard can't swim well. Everyone knows that it'll look completely accidental. I couldn't swim well. That was true. It was something Melanie had learned about me, Early in our relationship, when I had explained why I preferred pool lounging to swimming during our honeymoon, a detail I had shared in trust and vulnerability, now to be used as the method of my murder. But the revelation that shattered me completely was buried deeper in their conversation history. They discussed not just my death, but my entire married life with cruel detachment. They laughed about my romantic gestures, mocked the gifts I'd given her, ridiculed my expressions of love. He bought me diamond earrings for our anniversary. One message read, $2,000. What an idiot. He has no idea I give everything to you. Milton's response, at least we know he's good for the money. Keep playing the loving wife. It won't be much longer. Every anniversary gift, every birthday surprise, every spontaneous gesture of love I had made had been immediately reported to Milton like intelligence gathered by a spy. They had turned my genuine affection into a source of amusement, and profit the sound of the shower stopping upstairs jolted me back to the present. I quickly hid the phone and tried to compose myself, but my hands were shaking and my heart was pounding so hard. I was sure she would notice. Melanie appeared in the kitchen 20 minutes later, looking radiant in a yellow sundress that had always been one of my favorites. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup subtle but flawless. She moved around our kitchen with practiced ease, preparing breakfast while chatting about plans for the weekend. I thought we might visit the farmer's market. This afternoon, she said, flipping pancakes with expert precision. Bethany mentioned they have those organic strawberries. You love Bethany? The name sent a chill through me. As I remembered seeing it in some of the messages, I had assumed Bethany was just Melanie's friend, someone she occasionally met for lunch or shopping trips. But now I wondered what role she played. In this elaborate deception, that sounds nice, I managed to say. Accepting the plate of pancakes she set before me, they smelled delicious, looked perfect, exactly the way I liked them. But I could barely bring myself to take a bite. As I forced myself to eat, I watched Melanie move around the kitchen. She was so convincing in her role as the loving wife that it was hard to believe what I had read. Just minutes before, every gesture seemed genuine, every smile warm and authentic. If I hadn't seen those messages with my own eyes, I never would have suspected her of being anything other than what she appeared to be. That's when I realized the true depth of her deception. This wasn't just about money or insurance policies. This was about a woman who had spent 8 years of her life perfecting a performance, living a complete lie, sharing my bed and my home while planning my death, with the cold calculation of a professional assassin. You seem distracted this morning, she observed, settling into the chair across from me, with her own plate. Everything okay? I looked into her green eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me with such apparent love on our wedding day, the same eyes that had filled with tears when we thought she might be pregnant last year, the same eyes that now held secrets that could destroy me, just work. Stress, I said, using the same excuse she had been using for months to explain her strange behavior. She reached across the table and took my hand in hers. Her touch was warm, familiar, comforting in its practiced perfection. You work too hard, Bernard. You need to learn to relax, to enjoy life more. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. She was telling me to enjoy life while planning to end it. I squeezed her hand gently, playing my own part in this twisted performance. You're right, I said. Maybe I should take some time off. Soon, her eyes lit up with what looked like genuine excitement. That's a wonderful idea. We could take that trip to Europe. We've been talking about maybe visit Italy. CD. He countryside. I nodded though. I knew, now that any trip we took would likely be my last, she would have it all planned out. Some accident in a foreign country where an investigation might be less thorough, where a grieving widow could collect the insurance money and disappear with her lover without too many questions. After breakfast, Melanie announced she was going to spend some time in the garden. I watched her through the kitchen window as she knelt among the lavender plants, tending to them with the same care she had always shown. From a distance, she looked like the perfect wife, content in her domestic routine. The sight should have brought me peace. But now it filled me with dread. I used her absence to explore the phone more thoroughly. What I found in the photo gallery made my stomach turn. There were pictures of me taken without my knowledge, photos of our house from different angles, screenshots of my daily schedule, even pictures of my office building, taken from the street they had been surveilling me like a target for assassination. Every detail of my life had been documented and studied. They knew my routines better than I knew them myself. But it was the voice recordings that broke something inside me. Melanie had been secretly recording our most intimate conversations, our private moments, our discussions about the future. She had captured my expressions of love, my vulnerable confessions, my hopes and dreams for our life together, and she had shared them all with Milton. I listened to my own voice telling her I loved her, heard myself talking about growing old together, planning for retirement, discussing the children we hoped to have someday, and underneath each recording was Milton's commentary, making jokes about my sincerity, planning how to use my own words against me. The realization hit me that I had been living with a complete stranger for 8 years. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had loved and trusted and shared my life with, had never existed at all. She was an invention, a character created specifically to deceive me. I thought about our wedding day, how radiant she had looked walking down the aisle, how my heart had soared when she said, "I do." Had any of it been real for her, or had it all been just another performance, another step in their elaborate plan? The sound of her laughter from the garden drew my attention back to the window. She was on her phone, talking to someone while she worked among the flowers, from her body language, the way she tilted her head and smiled. I could tell it was an intimate conversation, Milton, no doubt. Getting a report on how well she was playing her role, I realized then that I needed to be just as good an actor as she was. I couldn't let her know what I had discovered. Not yet. I needed time to figure out what to do, how to protect myself, how to turn the tables on the woman who had made me the target of her deadly game. But as I watched her through the window, laughing and flirting with the man who was helping her plan my murder, I felt something else besides fear and betrayal. I felt anger, pure and righteous, beginning to burn in my chest. They thought they were so clever, so careful in their planning. They thought I was just a naive, trusting fool who would never see through their deception. They had underestimated me, and that might be their first and most crucial mistake. I put the phone away and began to formulate a plan of my own. If Melanie could spend 8 years living a lie, then I could certainly manage to pretend everything was normal for a few more days while I figured out how to save my own life. Sunday morning brought with it a revelation that shattered whatever remained of my faith in human nature. I had spent the weekend pretending to be the oblivious husband while secretly studying every message on that mysterious phone. What I discovered about Bethany's role in this conspiracy made me realize that the betrayal ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. Melanie was in the shower, preparing for what? Tea she called brunch with the girls. She had mentioned that Bethany would be joining her, along with a few other friends I had met occasionally over the years. Women who smiled warmly at me during dinner parties, who asked about my work with apparent interest, who complimented Melanie on what a wonderful husband she had found. Now I wondered how many of them knew the truth. While the water ran upstairs, I retrieved the phone from its hiding place and continued my investigation. The messages between Melanie and B, clearly Bethany, painted a picture that made my blood run cold. Bethany wasn't just an innocent friend who happened to know about Melanie's affair. She was the architect of the entire scheme. The earliest messages revealed that Bethany and Melanie had been roommates in college, where they had apparently spent their time studying more than just textbooks. They had researched wealthy widowers, men who fit a specific profile: successful, lonely, vulnerable, and financially secure, found another potential target. One of Bethany's messages from 3 years ago read, Bernard Mitchell, 50 years old, lost his wife in a car accident 2 years ago. Real estate developer, estimated net worth over $2 million, still wearing his wedding ring. So he's definitely not over the loss. Melanie's response was enthusiastic. Perfect. He sounds ideal, lonely, rich, and emotionally damaged. Exactly what we're looking for. They had discussed me like I was a mark in a confidence game, analyzing my psychological state and financial situation with the cold precision of professional criminals. Bethany had apparently done extensive research into my background, my business dealings. Even my relationship with Sarah, the dead wife angle, is perfect. Bethany had written men like him never really get over losing their first love. If you can make him think you're similar to her, he'll fall hard and fast. Attach the emotional hook, and the financial hook becomes easy. I felt sick. Reading their casual discussion of Sarah's memory being used as a weapon against me, they had taken the most painful experience of my life and turned it into a tool for manipulation. But it was the recent messages between Bethany and Melanie that revealed the true scope of their current plan. Bethany wasn't just advising from the sidelines, she was actively participating in the preparations for my murder. Milton's getting nervous about the timeline. Bethany had written just 3 days ago, he thinks you should move faster. The baby is going to start showing soon, and questions will get harder to deflect. Melanie's response chilled me. I know, but we have to be careful. Bernard's starting to notice things. Yesterday, he asked why I've been on my phone so much. We can't afford to make him suspicious. Now maybe it's time for the accident. Bethany had replied, Milton has everything planned out. The jogging route, the timing, even the police response, he's thought of every detail. They discussed my death with the same casual tone. They might use to plan a dinner party. No emotion, no hesitation, just cold calculation about the best way to kill me and collect the insurance money. I discovered that Bethany had been conducting surveillance on me for months. She had followed me to work, documented my routines, even befriended some of my colleagues under false pretenses to learn more about my schedule and habits. He leaves the office every day at exactly 5:30. One of her reports read, takes the same elevator, walks to the same parking garage. Very predictable patterns. This could be useful if we need an alternative to the jogging route. The methodical way they had studied my life was terrifying. They knew things about my daily routine that I didn't even realize I did consistently. They had turned my predictability, something I had always considered a sign of reliability and stability, into a vulnerability they could exploit. But perhaps most disturbing was learning about Bethany's previous experience. With this type of scheme, the messages revealed that I wasn't the first target. Remember how well the Hartford job went. Bethany had written in one message, clean, simple, no complications. The widow collected her money and disappeared, just like we planned. Hartford, I felt a chill as I realized they were discussing another man they had killed, another husband who had trusted the wrong woman, who had believed he had found love, only to become the victim of an elaborate murder plot. That was different. Melanie had responded, Richard was older, weaker. Bernard is stronger, more alert. We have to be more careful with him. Richard, they had killed a man named Richard in Hartford, and now they were planning to do the same thing to me. I wasn't their first victim. I was just their latest target in what appeared to be a serial killing operation, disguised as insurance fraud. The sound of footsteps above told me Melanie was getting out of the shower. I quickly hid the phone and tried to compose myself, but my hands were shaking and my heart was racing. Learning about Bethany's involvement had somehow made everything worse. It meant that every social interaction I had experienced over the past few years had been tainted by deception. I thought about all the times Bethany had been in our home, sitting in our living room, eating dinner at our table, accepting my hospitality while secretly planning my death. She had looked me in the eye and smiled while knowing exactly how they intended to kill me. Melanie appeared in the kitchen wearing a light blue dress that brought out her eyes. She looked beautiful, refreshed, ready for a pleasant morning with her friends. The sight of her filled me with revulsion. "You look lovely," I managed to say, playing the role of the devoted husband. She beamed at the compliment, moving close to kiss my cheek. "Thank you, sweetheart. Bethany is picking me up in 20 minutes. We're trying that new place downtown, the one with the rooftop garden." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Tell Bethany I said hello, I will. She always asks about you. You know, she thinks you're wonderful." The irony of those words was almost unbearable. Bethany thought I was wonderful, all right. Wonderfully naive, wonderfully trusting, wonderfully easy to kill. "What are your plans for today?" Melanie asked, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Just some paperwork from the office." I said, "Maybe a run later if the weather holds." She turned to me with what looked like genuine concern. "Be careful on those lakefront paths. They can be slippery when they're wet." Even her words of caution took on a sinister meaning. Now was she worried about my safety, or was she worried that I might have an accident before they were ready to execute their plan? A car honked outside, and Melanie gathered her purse and jacket. "That's Bethany. I'll see you this afternoon." She kissed me goodbye. The same warm, loving kiss she had given me hundreds of times before. But now it felt like a betrayal, like Judas kissing Jesus. Before handing him over to his executioners, I watched from the window as she walked to Bethany's car. Bethany waved at me from the driver's seat, the same friendly wave she had given me dozens of times before. She was an attractive woman in her mid-30s with short blonde hair and an easy smile. She looked like exactly the kind of person you would trust, the kind of friend you would want in your life. Seeing her now, knowing what she really was, made my skin crawl. As soon as they drove away, I retrieved the phone again and continued reading. I discovered that they had been planning this for over a year, waiting for the perfect opportunity to execute their plan. The pregnancy had accelerated their timeline, but they had been preparing for my death. Long before Melanie had conceived Milton's child, they had even discussed what she would do after I was dead. She would play the grieving widow for an appropriate period, probably 6 months to a year, before quietly moving away to start her new life. With Milton, they had already picked out a house in Costa Rica, a country with no extradition treaty with the United States, where they could live comfortably. On the insurance money, the beach house looks perfect. One of Melanie's messages read, "Private secluded cash purchase, so no paper trail, will be completely free to start over." They had planned my entire aftermath, right down to where they would live, and how they would spend the money they received for killing me. They had reduced my life to a simple transaction, my death in exchange for their financial freedom. But it was the final set of messages that made me realize just how urgent my situation had become. The conversation was from just yesterday, while I had been pretending to read in my study. "Milton is getting impatient." Bethany had written, "He wants to move this week. He's worried about waiting any longer." Melanie's response was equally urgent. "I know I can keep Bernard calm for a few more days, but not much longer. He's starting to ask questions about my phone calls." Wednesday morning, Bethany had replied, "The jogging route, Milton will be in position by 6 a.m. Make sure Bernard takes his usual path." Wednesday, that was just 3 days away. They were planning to kill me in 3 days. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead as the reality of my situation hit me fully. This wasn't some distant threat or elaborate fantasy. They were going to try to murder me on Wednesday morning, and they had it all planned out in meticulous detail. I forced myself to read through Milton's technical messages about the murder plan. He had studied the lakefront jogging path extensively, identified the exact spot where they would stage my accident, and even timed the police response to ensure they would have enough time to make everything look convincing. "The rocks are loose near the North Bend." One of his messages read, "Easy to make it look like he slipped and fell. The water is deep enough there that even a good swimmer would have trouble." And we know Bernard can barely swim at all. They had thought of everything, planned for every contingency. Hay knew the timing of the morning joggers, the schedule of the park maintenance crews, even the patrol patterns of the local police. This wasn't the work of amateurs. This was a carefully orchestrated murder plot. The sound of a car in the driveway told me that Melanie was returning from her brunch. I quickly hid the phone and tried to prepare myself for another performance, another few hours of pretending that everything was normal, while knowing that my wife and her accomplices were planning to kill me in 72 hours. But as I watched Melanie walk up the front path, laughing at something on her phone, probably a message from Milton or Bethany, I felt something change inside me. The fear was still there, but it was being joined by something else. Determination. They thought they had the perfect plan. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated me. They saw me as a victim, a target, a mark to be exploited and discarded. But I was still alive, I still had time. And now I knew exactly what they were planning. Monday morning arrived with deceptive normality. I made coffee, read the newspaper, went through the motions of being a man who didn't know he had 48 hours to live. But underneath my calm exterior, I was executing a plan of my own, one that would ensure I survived long enough to see justice done. Melanie was unusually affectionate that morning, which I now understood was part of her performance. She needed me, relaxed and unsuspecting, for what they had planned. On Wednesday, she made my favorite breakfast, wore the perfume I had bought her last Christmas, and even suggested we plan a vacation for next month. I was thinking about that trip to Italy, she said. Buttering toast with deliberate care. Maybe we could visit Tuscany, stay in one of those beautiful villas you're always talking about. I nodded enthusiastically. Playing my part, that sounds wonderful. We should look into it this week. She smiled, but I caught something dark flickering in her eyes. She knew there would be no trip to. Oh, Italy, no next month for us to plan together. By Thursday, she expected to be a wealthy widow, free to start her new life with Milton. I'll call the travel agent today, she said, maintaining the charade with impressive commitment. As soon as Melanie left for her job at the art gallery, I began implementing my own plan. I had spent most of Sunday night thinking about my options, and I had concluded that my only chance of survival lay in disappearing before they could execute their scheme. But I couldn't just run away. I needed to ensure they couldn't follow me, couldn't find me, and couldn't continue their killing spree with another innocent victim. That meant I had to be methodical, careful, and absolutely certain that I left no trace of where I was going. My first stop was the bank. I had called ahead and arranged a meeting with the manager, claiming I needed to make some urgent financial adjustments for a business opportunity. It wasn't entirely a lie. The opportunity was staying alive. Mr. Mitchell, the manager, greeted me warmly. How can we help you today? I had prepared this conversation carefully. I need to move some funds around quickly. I'm considering a time-sensitive investment opportunity, and I want to have liquid assets available. Over the next hour, I systematically moved money from our joint accounts into a new personal account that Melanie knew nothing about. I transferred $300,000, leaving enough in the joint account to avoid raising immediate suspicions, but taking enough to ensure my financial independence. I also changed my direct deposit information, redirecting my salary to the new account, starting immediately if Melanie tried to drain our joint finances. After my supposed death, she would find far less than she expected. Next, I visited my lawyer's office. James Patterson had been handling my legal affairs for 15 years, and I trusted him completely. Bernard, he said, welcoming me into his office. What brings you here today? Nothing serious, I hope. I want to make some changes to my will, I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. Some significant changes. I spent an hour rewriting my entire will, removing Melanie as the primary beneficiary, and instead leaving everything to charity, with specific instructions that the funds be used to help victims of domestic violence and fraud. If I did die, Melanie wouldn't see a penny of my money. This is quite a dramatic change, James observed, reviewing the documents. Are you sure about this? Completely sure, I said. And James, I need this to be absolutely confidential. Don't mention these changes to anyone, including Melanie. Can you ensure that? He nodded, though I could see curiosity in his eyes. Of course, attorney-client privilege applies absolutely. I also gave him sealed instructions to be opened only in the event of my death, explaining everything I had discovered about Melanie's plan. If they succeeded in killing me, at least there would be evidence pointing to the truth. My next stop was a small electronics store across town, where I purchased a new cell phone under a fake name, paying cash. I spent the afternoon setting up secure email accounts and researching private investigators in different states. If I was going to disappear, I needed professional help covering my tracks. By evening, I had made significant progress on my escape plan, but I still faced the challenge of getting through the next day without arousing Melanie's suspicions. She was watching me carefully now, though she tried to hide it, behind smiles and casual conversation. "You seem energetic today," she commented over dinner. "Everything okay at work? Just excited about some new projects?" I said, "Sometimes it feels good to shake things up. Try something different." She nodded, but I caught her studying my face, looking for signs of suspicion or awareness. I forced myself to maintain eye contact, to smile naturally, to play the role of the unsuspecting husband. For just a little longer, that night as we lay in bed, Melanie was more physically affectionate than she had been in months. She initiated intimacy with an intensity that might have thrilled me under different circumstances, but knowing what I now knew, her touch felt calculating, like she was saying goodbye to the man she was about to kill. "I love you so much," she whispered in the darkness afterward. I hope you know that I told her I loved her too. The words feeling like ash in my mouth. How many times had she said those same words while planning my death? How many of our intimate moments had been nothing more than performance art? For her, Tuesday arrived with an urgency that made my skin crawl. Hours until they planned to execute their scheme, I knew I had to maintain my normal routine while making final preparations for my escape. At the office, I quietly made arrangements with my business partner to handle my accounts for the next few weeks. I told him I was considering taking some personal time, possibly traveling, and needed to ensure everything would run smoothly. In my absence, "You deserve a break," he said. "You've been working too hard lately. Where are you thinking of going?" "Not sure yet." I replied truthfully, "Somewhere quiet where I can think." I spent the morning transferring additional funds and making copies of all my important documents. By lunchtime, I had enough liquid assets to disappear completely, along with new identification documents I had arranged through contacts in my business network. The afternoon was spent creating a detailed timeline of everything I had discovered about Melanie's plan. I documented every message I had found, every piece of evidence, every detail of their conspiracy. If something went wrong, if they somehow managed to find me, I wanted to ensure there was a complete record of their crimes. As evening approached, I realized this would likely be my last night in the house. I had called home for 8 years. I walked through the rooms, looking at the furniture we had bought together, the photographs of our life together, the mementos of what I had thought. HT was a loving marriage. It all felt like artifacts from someone else's life, now props, in an elaborate stage production that was finally coming to an end. Melanie came home from work carrying flowers, a beautiful bouquet of white lilies that she arranged carefully in our dining room. "They're lovely," I commented, though the sight of them made me uncomfortable. White lilies were funeral flowers, traditionally associated with death and mourning. Was this another calculated gesture her way of preparing for my demise? "I thought they would brighten the house," she said, adjusting them in their vase. "Fresh flowers always make me happy." We had dinner together, our last meal as husband and wife. Though she didn't know it yet, she chatted about her day, about plans for the weekend, about small domestic details that would never matter, because by weekend she expected me to be dead. "Don't forget about your morning run tomorrow," she said as we cleared the dishes. "The weather forecast looks perfect for it there." It was her gentle reminder to ensure I would be on that jogging path at exactly the right time for Milton to spring their trap. She was still playing her role perfectly, the loving wife, concerned about her husband's exercise routine. "I'm looking forward to it." I said I could use a good run to clear my head. After dinner, I excused myself to my study, claiming I had some work emails to catch up on. Instead, I spent the time making final preparations for my escape. I packed a small bag with essential items, hid it in my car, and made sure I had everything. I needed to disappear at a moment's notice. I also wrote a letter to Melanie, though I wasn't sure if I would ever give it to her. It explained what I had discovered, how I had learned about their plan, and why I was choosing to disappear rather than confront them directly. Writing it felt cathartic, like finally telling the truth. After days of deception, as bedtime approached, I realized I was facing a crucial decision. I could go through with my plan to DI, disappear tomorrow morning, vanishing before they could execute their scheme. It was the safe choice, the smart choice, the one most likely to keep me alive. But it would also mean letting them get away with their crimes, leaving them free to find another victim, another lonely man to seduce and murder for his money. The thought of Richard, their previous victim in Hartford, haunted me. How many other men had there been? How many would there be in the future if I didn't stop them as I lay in bed next to Melanie, listening to her peaceful breathing? I made my final decision. I wouldn't just run away. I would turn the tables on them, use their own plan against them, and ensure they faced justice for what they had done. Tomorrow morning, I would go for my run as scheduled, but I wouldn't be the victim they expected me to be. I would be the hunter, and they would become the hunted. Wednesday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and the promise of death. I woke before dawn as I always did on running days, but this time I knew exactly what awaited me on the lakefront path. Milton would be positioned near the rocky outcrop at the north bend, waiting for the perfect moment to stage my accident. Melanie stirred beside me as I got out of bed, her eyes opening, just enough to watch me pull on my running clothes. "Be careful out there," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "I love you." Those words, which once would have filled me with warmth, now sent ice through my veins. She was sending me off to my planned execution, with words of love on her lips. "I love you too," I replied, the lie coming easier now after days of practice. But instead of heading to the lakefront path, I drove to a coffee shop across town and waited. I sat in my car, watching the sun rise over a city where my wife and her accomplices believed they were committing the perfect murder. At 6:15, my phone rang. It was Melanie. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Her voice carried just the right note of concern. "You should be back from your run by now." I decided to "Kip it today," I said calmly. "I wasn't feeling well. Probably something I ate last night." There was a pause, just long enough for me to know I had disrupted their carefully laid plans. "Oh," she said, and I could hear the confusion in her voice. "Well, maybe you should see a doctor. If you're not feeling well, I'm sure it's nothing serious. I'll just take it easy today." After I hung up, I imagined the frantic phone calls she was probably making to Milton and Bethany, trying to figure out what to do when their target didn't show up for his own murder. I spent the day implementing the final phase of my plan. Instead of running from them, I was going to expose them. But I needed to do it in a way that would ensure justice was served. Simply telling people what I had discovered wouldn't be enough. I needed proof. Evidence that couldn't be denied or dismissed. That evening, I told Melanie I was feeling much better and suggested we go out for dinner to celebrate my birthday, which was actually the following Saturday. She agreed enthusiastically, probably seeing it as an opportunity to get me into a vulnerable position again. Let's invite some friends. I suggested make it a real celebration. I called Bethany myself, insisting that she join us along with a few other people I wanted to have as witnesses. I chose the Meridian restaurant, again the same place where this had all begun. With that mysterious black box, the dinner party was set for 8 Ras by 7:30. I had already arrived and made special arrangements. With the restaurant manager, I had also contacted an old friend from college who happened to be a detective with the state police, asking him to be nearby but not visible. Melanie arrived looking stunning in a red dress that hugged her figure perfectly. She had taken extra care with her makeup and hair, as if this were truly a celebration instead of another opportunity to plan my death. Milton was with her, which surprised me until I realized she was probably introducing him as just a friend, keeping up the PI. Tense, while having her accomplice close at hand, Bernard. "You remember Milton," she said, as they approached the table. "He works in insurance. I thought he might be interesting company tonight." I shook Milton's hand, looking directly into the eyes of the man who had been planning to kill me. Just that morning, he was younger than I'd expected, probably in his mid-40s, with an easy smile and confident handshake. He looked exactly like the kind of man women found. Attractive, charming, trustworthy. "Happy birthday," he said warmly. "Melanie tells me you're a real estate developer. That must be fascinating work." "It has its moments," I replied, studying his face for any sign of nervousness or guilt. He showed none. He was a good actor, almost as good as Melanie. Bethany arrived a few minutes later, wearing a black cocktail dress and her usual bright smile. She hugged me warmly, kissing my cheek like the caring friend she pretended to be. "You look wonderful," she said. "Marriage agrees with you." The irony of her comment was almost unbearable. We ordered drinks and appetizers, settling into what appeared to be a normal, social evening. The conversation flowed easily, covering safe topics like work, travel plans, and local events. If I hadn't known what these people were really planning, I might have enjoyed myself. But I was watching everything carefully, noting the subtle glances between Melanie and Milton, the way Bethany kept checking her phone, the nervous energy that none of them could quite hide. Despite their polished performances, as the main course was served, I decided it was time to begin my own performance. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," I said, raising my wine glass. "It means so much to have such good friends around me, especially people I can trust completely." The word trust hung in the air like a challenge. I saw Melanie's smile falter slightly, though she recovered quickly. "We're the ones who should be grateful," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You're such a wonderful husband, Bernard." "Dee, I can't imagine life without you." "That's interesting," I said, my voice remaining conversational, "because I've been thinking a lot about life lately, about how quickly things can change, how people aren't always who they seem to be." Milton shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but his voice remained steady when he spoke. "That's very philosophical. Are you going through some kind of midlife reflection?" "You could say that. I've been discovering things about myself, about the people around me, surprising things. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the black phone, setting it on the table where everyone could see it. Melanie's face went completely white. "I received an interesting gift last Friday." I continued, my voice calm and measured. "Someone wanted me to know the truth about my life, about my marriage, about the people I thought I could trust." Bethany's hand was trembling as she reached for her wine glass. "Bernard, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about murder." I said simply, "I'm talking about a conspiracy to kill me for insurance money. I'm talking about the fact that my loving wife has been planning my death for months." The silence at the table was deafening. Other diners continued their conversations around us, oblivious to the drama unfolding at our table. Melanie tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled sound. "Bernard, you're scaring me. What has gotten into you?" I began reading from the phone, reciting their own words back to them. The messages about the insurance policy, the discussions of my daily routine, the plans for my accident at the lakefront path. Can't wait to be free of him. I read aloud just a little longer, and we can start our real life together. Milton stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to listen to this crazy talk. Sit down, Milton, I said quietly, and something in my voice made him pause. The police are already on their way. You're not going anywhere. Bethany made a small whimpering sound, her carefully constructed facade crumbling completely. Bernard, please let me explain. Explain what I asked, how you've been planning to murder me, how you killed a man named Richard in Hartford before targeting me, how you turned my love for my dead wife into a weapon to use against me. Melanie was crying now, but I could see the calculation behind her tears. She was still trying to find a way out, still trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. I do love you, she said desperately. Everything else that was just fantasy, just foolish talk. I would never actually hurt you. You've been poisoning me, I said, pulling out a small vial from my pocket. I had my blood tested. The doctors found traces of compounds that have been making me sick, making me weak, slow-acting poisons designed to make my eventual death look natural. The vial contained water, but they didn't know that. I watched as all three of them stared at it with horror, probably wondering how I had figured out that part of their plan. The pregnancy, I continued. It's not mine, is it? It's Milton's. You've been together for 10 years, planning this for at least 3. I was never your husband, Melanie. I was just your latest victim. She broke down completely, then sobbing hysterically, as other diners began to stare at our table. But even in her breakdown, I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. Milton made a sudden move toward the exit, but 2 plainclothes police officers appeared, blocking his path. My friend from the state police had been listening to everything from a nearby table wearing a wireless recording device that had captured every word. Milton Davidson. You're under arrest, one of the officers said. Producing handcuffs, Bethany tried to run in the opposite direction, but she didn't get far before additional officers appeared. The restaurant had been quietly surrounded while we were having dinner. As they handcuffed Melanie, she looked at me with eyes that held no love, no remorse, only pure hatred. You think you're so smart, she hissed, but you'll never get over this. You'll never trust anyone again. We've destroyed you, even if we didn't kill you. I looked at her calmly, feeling nothing but pity for the broken, evil woman I had once believed I loved. No, I said quietly. You've freed me. The last thing I saw before they led her away was the confusion in her eyes. She couldn't understand how someone she had considered weak and naive had outmaneuvered her so completely as the police took their statements and the restaurant slowly returned to normal. I sat alone at the table, looking at the remnants of our dinner. The birthday cake I'd ordered arrived just as they were leading Melanie away, a small irony that wasn't lost on me. The waiter approached hesitantly, unsure what to do about the cake. Given the circumstances, should I take this away, sir? He asked. No, I said, picking up the knife to cut myself a piece. I think I'll have some birthday cake after all. For the first time in 8 years, I was truly free to celebrate. 7 months later, I stood on the deck of a small blue cottage overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The salt air filled my lungs as waves crashed against the rocky shore below, a sound that had become my daily meditation, washing away the remnants of a life I had thought was real. The cottage was everything I had dreamed of, but never allowed myself to have. Simple, peaceful, honest, no pretense, no elaborate furnishings chosen to impress, no carefully curated life, designed to attract the wrong kind of attention, just weathered wood, comfortable furniture, and a view that stretched to infinity. The legal proceedings had concluded 3 weeks ago. Melanie Milton and Bethany were all serving lengthy prison sentences for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and the death of Richard Pemberton in Hartford. The investigation had revealed that Richard had been just one of several victims in what authorities were calling an organized murder-for-profit scheme. It had been operating for over a decade. I testified at their trial, looking each of them in the eye as I recounted how they had planned my death, with the same casual indifference they might use to plan a vacation. Melanie had tried to maintain her innocence until the very end, claiming she had been manipulated by Milton and Bethany, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recorded conversations, the detailed murder, plans, the evidence of previous victims, it all painted a picture of a woman who had made killing her profession. The prosecutor called her a black widow, who spun webs of deception around vulnerable men, feeding on their loneliness and trust. During the trial, I learned details about their operation that made me realize how lucky I was to be alive. They had been responsible for at least 7 deaths over the past 12 years, targeting widowers and divorced men with substantial assets and limited family connections. Each time they had followed the same pattern: seduce, marry, isolate, and kill Richard Pemberton. Their victim before me had been a retired engineer whose wife had died of cancer. Like me, he had been lonely and vulnerable when Melanie entered his life. Unlike me, he hadn't received a mysterious warning that saved his life. The revelation that affected me most was learning about the real Melanie Crawford. The woman I had married didn't even exist. Her real name was Margaret Sellers, and she had been using false identities for most of her adult life. The gentle, artistic woman who loved classical music and gardening had been entirely fabricated, a character created specifically to appeal to my psychological profile. Even her supposed job at the art gallery had been fake. She had never worked there. Bethany had simply arranged for someone to answer the phone and provide an alibi for Melanie's whereabouts when needed. Every aspect of our 8-year marriage had been built on lies. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation was about Sarah, my first wife. During their research, and to my background, they had desecrated her grave, stealing personal items that Melanie then discovered in antique shops, claiming they reminded her of things her grandmother had owned. She had used my dead wife's jewelry and possessions as props in her performance, turning Sarah's memory into another tool for manipulation. Standing on my deck now, watching seabirds dive for fish in the morning light, I felt only peace when I thought about Sarah, the real Sarah, not the twisted version Melanie had created to manipulate me. I had finally been able to properly mourn my first wife, to separate my genuine memories of her from the psychological manipulation I had endured. The cottage had belonged to Sarah's aunt, a woman I had met only once at our wedding, but who had left me the property in her will years ago. I had never visited it during my marriage to Melanie, claiming I was too busy with work, but really because I wasn't ready to face that connection to Sarah's family. Now I understood that some part of me had been saving this place, keeping it as a refuge for when I truly needed it. The aunt had passed away 2 years ago, and the property had been waiting for me, almost as if Sarah herself had arranged for me to have a safe harbor. When my world collapsed, I had sold the house on Riverside Drive, unable to live. In a space that held so many poisoned memories, every room reminded me of Melanie's deception, of the years I had spent unknowingly, sharing my life with someone who was planning my death. The new owners were a young couple, expecting their first child, and I took comfort in knowing that the house would now be filled with genuine love instead of elaborate lies. My business was thriving under the management of my partner, and I had discovered that working remotely from the coast suited me perfectly. I handled the financial and strategic aspects of our development projects, while he managed the day-to-day operations. It was an arrangement that gave me the freedom I needed, while maintaining the professional success I had worked so hard to achieve. But the most significant change in my life wasn't the new location or the simplified lifestyle. It was the absence of fear. For 8 years, I had lived with a constant undercurrent of anxiety that I had attributed to work stress or middle-aged worries. Now I realized that some part of me had always sensed that something was wrong with my marriage, that the woman I lived with wasn't who she claimed to be, that intuitive alarm had been silenced by Melanie's masterful manipulation. But it had never completely disappeared. Living without that constant state of alert, vigilance was like recovering from a chronic illness I hadn't realized I was suffering from. I had also discovered the simple pleasure of solitude. After 8 years of carefully monitored conversations and calculated intimacy, being alone with my own thoughts was a luxury I had forgotten how to appreciate. I could read, without being questioned about my choice of books, take walks without accounting for my whereabouts, make decisions based solely on what I wanted rather than what might please someone else. The investigation had revealed that Melanie had been documenting my every move, recording my conversations, and reporting my activities to Milton and Bethany, as if I were a subject in some twisted, scientific experiment living without that surveillance. Knowing that my privacy was truly private felt like breathing freely after years of suffocation. I had started writing, something I had always wanted to do, but never found time for during my previous life. The story wasn't about my experience with Melanie, though. That would certainly make for compelling reading. Someday, instead, I was working on a novel about a man who discovers that his entire understanding of himself has been shaped by other people's expectations and who must learn to define his own identity. The writing process was therapeutic, helping me work through the psychological aftermath of discovering that my marriage had been an elaborate fraud. I was learning to trust my own judgment again, to distinguish between genuine emotions and manipulated responses. 3 weeks ago, I had received a letter from Melanie in prison. I had debated whether to read it, but curiosity ultimately won out. The letter was several pages long, filled with what appeared to be genuine remorse and pleas for forgiveness. She claimed that she had actually fallen in love with me during our marriage, that she had tried to call off the murder plot, but hadn't been able to escape Milton's control. It was her final attempt at manipulation, one last effort to plant seeds of doubt in my mind. I had read the entire letter carefully, then burned it in my fireplace, watching the paper turn to ash, as I finally let go of any lingering connection to the woman who had tried to destroy me. The truth was that I felt no anger toward any of them anymore. Anger required emotional investment, and I had none left to give to people who had never truly existed in my life. They were strangers who had played roles in an elaborate deception, but they had never been real friends, real family, or a real wife. You can't miss something you never actually had. What I had found instead was something I hadn't expected: gratitude. The experience had been horrible, traumatic, life-threatening, but it had also freed me from an existence that had been slowly killing me. In ways I hadn't recognized, I had been living someone else's life, trying to be someone else's version of a good husband, successful man, and respectable citizen. Now at 53 years old, I was finally living authentically for the first time. In decades, I woke up each morning eager to see what the day would bring, rather than dreading another performance in someone else's script. I made decisions based on my own values, rather than trying to anticipate what others expected of me. The cottage came with a small garden that the previous caretaker had maintained, and I had discovered an unexpected pleasure in working with the soil, planting vegetables and herbs that I would actually eat. Rather than ornamental flowers chosen to impress visitors, there was something profoundly satisfying about growing my own food, about the direct connection between effort and nourishment. I had also adopted a dog from the local shelter, a middle-aged golden retriever named Sam, whose previous owner had died of old age. Like me, Sam had needed a fresh start, and we had formed an easy companionship based on mutual respect rather than need or dependence. In the evenings, Sam and I would walk along the beach, both of us content with the rhythm of waves and the endless horizon. These walks had become a form of meditation, a time to process the day's experiences and plan for tomorrow, without the constant analysis and second-guessing that had characterized my previous life. I had learned to really cook, not just heat up prepared meals or follow complicated recipes designed to impress dinner guests, simple, honest food that nourished my body and satisfied my appetite. There was something deeply centering about the process of selecting ingredients, preparing them with care, and eating meals I had created with my own hands. The local community had welcomed me without curiosity or judgment. They knew I was someone starting over, but they didn't pry into the details. Of my previous life, I was simply Bernard, the man who lived in the blue cottage and walked his dog on the beach every evening. It was enough. I had joined the volunteer fire department, partly because they needed members, but mostly because I wanted to be part of something that helped rather than exploited after years of unknowingly being a victim. There was deep satisfaction in being someone who responded to emergencies, who helped solve problems rather than creating them. The work was physically demanding and emotionally rewarding in ways that my previous career had never been when we rescued someone from a car accident or saved someone's Used from burning down, the gratitude was immediate and genuine. No one was plotting against us or calculating how to benefit from our efforts. As I stood on my deck that morning, watching the sun climb higher into a sky full of promise, I realized that I'd never been happier. Not the complicated, anxious happiness I had thought I felt during my marriage, but a deep, quiet contentment that came from living in alignment with my own values and desires. My phone buzzed with a text message from my business partner, updating me on a project we were developing in the mountains. Good news, successful progress, the kind of communication that energized rather than drained me. I would call him back later, after my morning walk with Sam. But first, I wanted to savor this moment, this perfect morning in a life that was finally authentically mine. Thank you for watching this video. Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly value every story and every voice. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Uncle Bernard and share this video with your friends.